και να περάσουμε στην επόμενη ανακοίνωση και καλώ στο βήμα τον Romain Goudjil, το είπα σωστά, ο οποίος θα μιλήσει στο θέμα The Athonite Way of Justice, monks facing judicial defeat.
First of all, I want to thank the organizer to allow me to give me the opportunity to make this presentation. I am thankful to have a great public, and I apologize to make my presentation in English, but my Greek is not so good. As the Apostle Paul wrote to his companion Timothy, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome. This quotation is used by Basil the Great in his so-called rule to prohibit lawsuit between monks and to promote the attitude of a true servant of God, an enemy of quarrel and cupidity, waiting calmly for the manifestation of the truth. Despite the principle, the monastic documentation of the Byzantine period sheds light on the antagonistic relationships between the monasteries and their neighbors, with the Byzantine authorities, and between each other. The archives of the monasteries of Mount Athos are not an exception at all. The judicial Athonite documents enable us to understand the judicial administration of the Byzantine Empire and the complex relationship between the Holy Mountain and Byzantine authorities. Numerous studies have been made concerning litigation of the Athonite monasteries against the tax authorities, for example, but the practical actions in justice of the monks as individuals and of the monasteries as legal entities have not been sufficiently studied. Apart from an article of Angeliki Layou and Dieter Simon concerning a quarrel between Shilandar and the Garfu, a little has been made concerning the litigation between monasteries themselves. This documentation is, however, a mine of information concerning the behavior of the monks in court. Indeed, the archives of all the monastery of Mount Athos contains mostly acts which can be shown to the Byzantine administration to prove a right, usually the ownership of an estate. Thus, the Athonites preserved only legal decisions in their favor, i.e. by which they obtained the ownership of or the use of a contested estate. But in case of litigation between the monasteries of the Holy Mountain and another, these documents give us information about the other monastery, the dismissed plaintiff, and the behavior of these monks. These litigations are all tried either by the emperor or the patriarch or the Athonite protos. These documents are the only ones which give us an idea of the judicial tactics of the Athonite monasteries losing their cases. If in the vast majority of litigation preserved, all the parties accept the decision of the court, sometimes the dismissed monastery try to avoid a condemnation with dilatory actions, even actions conducting to a wrong judgment by using oral or written forgery, or even violence. This is this kind of behavior that I want to study here. From a quick analysis of the Athonite corpus, 48 acts, at least, arises concerning litigation between monasteries of the Holy Mountain between the 11th and the 15th centuries and involving abuse and offense by the monks during the proceeding. A comparison with the behavior of litigants in the register of the Patriarchate of Constantinople and a confrontation with the Byzantine law will tell us if this kind of behavior is part of the conventional Byzantine judicial practices or if the attitude of the Athonite monks in justice differs from that of the rest of the Byzantines. Furthermore, the aim of this presentation is to study how the judicial Byzantine authority react to this improper behavior. To compare the behavior of the judicial administration depending on the personal status of the litigant will allow a better understanding if the Athonite monks are regular subjects of the Byzantine law or if they benefit from judicial exemption or special treatments before the courts, such as their numerous fiscal exemptions. The archive of the Athonite monasteries are overflowing of forged documents, especially imperial one, used in court. It concerns 18 acts out of the around 50 acts concerning abusive litigation between two Athonite monasteries. They are forged documents or case involving the use of forged documents. It is the first abusive behavior of the monasteries in number, but I will not develop this one. The conclusion of Nicolas Economidis and Franz Stolger on the subject already emphasizes the commonness of the offense among monks, but also lay people, and the impunity which is linked to it. The second most common abusive behavior is used by the Athonite monasteries in their litigation are the dilatory actions. It means all the tactics to delay the decision making. There is two ways to delay a decision making: to refuse to cooperate with judicial officers, and to refuse to be present in court. These tactics are involved in certain acts out of the corpus. The time needed to end a case in absentia or without any cooperation of one of the litigants is longer than a regular judicial case. It required the involvement of more judicial bodies and more bureaucratic work. During this time, the monasteries which usurp property takes advantage of it. The physical absence in court and the refuse to cooperate as well are attempts to delay the exercise of justice, but are also a way to surrender without taking any responsibility for the ownership's usurpation of an estate, and to postpone longer the transfer of the property to its right owner. In Byzantine law, dilatory tactics are not punished by themselves, but the litigants using it has no chance of success. Indeed, first of all, those who are summoned to court must appear. The Basilica states that someone who does not appear will be punished. Moreover, the Basilica provides that any judgment pronounced in absentia is valid if there was a formal summons before it. The refuse to cooperate with the judicial administration, generally by refusing to give any written or oral testimonies concerning the claim, is also condemned by the Basilica. Indeed, those who claim a property must prove it. This is not to the defendant to prove his own right. A case exemplifies all these tactics at once. In 1344, the monks of Xenophon sued the great Lavra because its monks diverted a mountain stream, the Stormion, which has now flooded a property of Xenophon. The monks of Xenophon appealed to a civil official in Thessaloniki to settle the case and asked for compensation. The great economist of Lavra was in Thessaloniki, and the judicial officer asked him to escort him to inquire into the estate. He refuses to answer this request. Then, a group of clerics and officials, including the judge Armenopoulos, is sent to the property to settle the case. Their report emphasizes the lack of willingness of the monastery of Lavra in the case. They never wanted to cooperate and demonstrate their right over the stream. The group of judges took his decision after his return in Thessaloniki and condemned the monk of Lavra in absentia and concluded that the river must be sent back in its bed. If we follow the legal framework of the Byzantine law on this topic, the Athonite monks suffered the law as anyone else. The monks of Lavra had no right on the river, and their lack of cooperation and their absence prove it. The monastery logically lost its claim. A last question remains unanswered. Are these behaviors common in the legal practice? Numerous cases from the register of the Patriarchate and the archive of the Athonite monasteries shed light on this common practice used by the Byzantines. I will develop only one case in the archive of Yveron. In 1421, Yveron is opposed to the family of the Argyropoli concerning the ownership of a garden in Thessaloniki. The general judges settled the case, but they faced the unwillingness of the aristocrats, who used dilatory maneuvers, refused to answer the summons, but sometimes appearing in court to shout and yell because they do not have any proof for the claim. The judges condemned the Argyropoli to the loss of their claim due to the absence of any proof of ownership of the garden. The Athonite monks seem to act like any other aristocrats in court, and they submit themselves to the law as a last resort. But in fact, it already means that the monks benefit of a privileged position. Athonite monks seems, in fact, to act like aristocrats of Constantinople. Indeed, the benefits of a privileged status. The definition of the concept of aristocracy in Byzantium is still open to debate. It is not the place to discuss it. It is, however, sure that we can define it as a group of people who, by their service to the state and the emperor, obtain privileges. The monasteries of the Holy Mountain, by their prayer for the sake of the and prosperity of the state and the emperor, help them out, and they obtain in return donations, fiscal exemptions, and an influential position in court. This position allowed the monasteries to appeal to court officials and the emperor to settle their judicial cases. In the rulings settling the case which opposed Dociariu and Xeropotamu in 1414, the description of the different stages of the proceedings is quite informative. The case concerning a field in Aemilia began 7 years before, in 1407, when the monks of Xeropotamu makes a complaint against Dociariu to the Emperor John VII, who tasked some archons with the settling of the quarrel. One of the archons was a kin of a monk of Xeropotamu, and the emperor already favored the monastery the same year. Xeropotamu won the ownership of the best part of the field, but we do not know the legal basis of this decision. The following year, the monks of Dociariu make a complaint for the same property against Xeropotamu to the emperor, who commissioned civil officials aided by the Kephali of Thessaloniki. The commission gives reason to Dociariu because of the lack of cooperation of Xeropotamu, probably because their ownership over the property is not legally well-founded. Finally, the monks of Dociariu send by the report of the Kephali to the emperor through the intermediary of a priest in Constantinople, and the case is settled by the emperor in 1414. This case shows that the means necessary for Dociariu to succeed in its claim. The plaintiff needs time, money, and a political network to go to petition the emperor. They need to have access to him or to have a network to deliver their claim to him. The first stage of the case exemplifies that a favored monastery like Xeropotamu can win its case only because of its privileged position in the emperor's mind. Only legal entities like the monasteries or individuals like aristocrats have the time and the money to carry out long judicial action. More than time, the Athonite monasteries like Byzantine aristocrats possess a power of influence over other operators of lawsuits. An act from Mark Dukas Glabas Kier Murinos in the archive of Dociariu from 1370-1371 seems to testify to this practice. The case relates to a water mill in Aemilia desired by Dociariu and Xeropotamu again. The water mill was a possession of Mark Dukas Glabas, Sir Murinos, and he sold it entirely to Dociariu in 1343. While Xeropotamu argued that half of the mill has already been sold to him by a servant of Murinos. Due to the political confusion, the case is only settled in 1355 in Constantinople in front of the Patriarch Callistos in favor of Dociariu, with the confirmation of an imperial chrysobullon of John V. But in 1371, it seems that the monks of Xeropotamu and Murinos have forgotten the previous ruling. The monks of Xeropotamu asked Murinos to re-establish justice by asking to the new patriarch Philotheos Kokkinos to dispense justice again on this case. Indeed, Murinos argued that the monks of Dociariu do not pay the entire price of the mill, so he wants to sell half of the mill to the monks of Xeropotamu. The monks of Dociariu came back to Constantinople, showing their numerous proofs testifying that they were the sole owner of the mill. The judgment ended the quarrel by confirming the ownership of the mill to Dociariu. Once again, we can see that the monasteries, due to their institutional nature and their imperial protection, can lengthen a lawsuit during more than 30 years. But this case shows us another major point. In the last part, in 1371, we cannot trust the narration which wanted us to believe in memory lapse for the monks of Xeropotamu and Murinos. They both have copies of the rulings of 1355 by the Patriarch Callistos and John V. Economides, in the commentary of these acts, suggested that Murinos tried to obtain additional profits from his own former meal by playing with a long-term acrimony between the monks of Xeropotamu and Docariu. We can also think that using their influence, the monks of Xeropotamu convinced Morinos to change his mind. By changing his mind, Morinos can sell his meal a second time and makes more profit, when the monks of Xeropotamu obtain what they want for 30 years. Again, there is no place to be surprised because it seems to be a typical behavior of the Byzantine aristocrats in court. Constantine Garidas, a jurist of the 11th century, already highlighted that aristocrats often pressure witnesses or litigants to obtain what they wanted. In any case, this kind of trick has a legal name, calumnia in Roman law, sycophantia in Byzantine law. It is defined as the act of giving money or something else to someone aiming that he brings a lawsuit, so a vexatious action. Those who organize this kind of judicial harassment are to be punished by paying fourfold of what they claim. In our case, Xeropotamu and Morinos would have obtained something, a meal for the monastery and money for Morinos. They are both guilty of vexatious litigation against Docariu. But in fact, in the last ruling in this case, there is no reference to this, no blame for the calumniators. We see that calumny is used in justice as a legal weapon by aristocrats and powerful monastery with total impunity. However, the monks of the monastery of the Holy Mountain seem to have more judicial privileges than the Byzantine aristocrats themselves. They can act violently without being disturbed by the Byzantine justice. The use of violence is quite common in the Byzantine society and a fortiori in very actual judicial cases. First and foremost, we can take a look to the register of the Patriarchate to observe that the aristocrats behave violently among themselves and are punished for that. I will only develop one case, but it is not uncommon at all. In 1315, John Sagitas and the priest Messembrinos appears before the Synod of Constantinople. The second one claimed that he owns a field of the first one in Peladaion. Indeed, the field was in the dowry of the bride of the priest's son. She is the daughter of the brother of John. This brother stole the field during the minority of John. The priest refuses to wait the ruling and decided to come back to the field in question and to pull the vineyard of John up, causing costly destruction. The Metropolitan of Prusa blamed his priest, and then the synod decided to condemn the priest Messembrinos to the payment of all the legal fees and to compensate the damage he caused. In this case, the litigants who act violently is punished and must pay to compensate the damage they did, as the Byzantine law states. Indeed, in the Basilica, it is written that those who steal violently property must be punished by paying a third of their own property. Here, the law has not been followed to the letter, but the pulling out of the vineyard has been compensated by a very huge fine. On the contrary, the violent behavior of the monks, especially in their attempts to occupy property, is never punished, but more it seems that violence enables the monasteries to get what they want, even if it's contrary to the law. This kind of settlement exists in 9 acts. The act of violence takes the shape of tumults at the border between 2 estates, of a violent encroaching in the estate of another monastery, or quite simply the destruction of an estate of a neighbor. It is interesting to note that in a third of these cases in which violence is involved, finishes with a compromise between the monasteries, often disadvantaging the monastery with the victim. This is the case in a quarrel between Esphigmenou and Vatopedi in 1316. Esphigmenou had a property which was quasi-surrendered by estates of Vatopedi. The monks of Vatopedi wanted to incorporate it in their own properties. They came in this particular estate with torches and clubs and sowed the seed of destruction and fire. The monks of Esphigmenou bring a lawsuit in front of the emperor, who validates the claim of Esphigmenou. The patriarch confirms the imperial judgment, and Vatopedi is responsible for the destruction. But the patriarch asks to the protors to find a compromise. We see here clearly that even if Vatopedi was infringing the law by his attempts to destroy and steal the estate of Esphigmenou, the Patriarch and the Emperor did not punish at all Vatopedi, and more, asked to the monks of Esphigmenou to develop a compromise with them. The Protos is entrusted with this mission. He proposed to make an exchange of property between the two monasteries. Esphigmenou refused first and argued that the monastery need a bigger property, probably to compensate the destruction caused by Vatopedi. The monks of Esphigmenou are reprimanded by the Protos and the assembly of the Holy Mountain because they do not want to make peace at any price. Finally, Esphigmenou exchanged his property with Vatopedi. So Vatopedi, by the destruction of the property of Esphigmenou, succeeded in obtaining the legal ownership of the estate, and Esphigmenou, who was the victim, is forced by Vatopedi to surrender. We can argue that Vatopedi was a more powerful monastery and Esphigmenou has no choice. But we can find another explanation. Indeed, in the imperial Typica, which regulates the Holy Mountain, the emperor regularly repeated that the monks must live without any trouble in Montatos from the 10th to the 15th century. For example, the emperor Tsimiskis stated that he was very attached to the idea of the monks living peacefully and did not approve any attempt by the monk to ask justice to secular court. In addition, in some acts concerning quarrel between monasteries, the emperor regularly wants to avoid any form of scandal. This is the case in an act to Zographou in 1318. Michael IX, Paleologos, settled a dispute between Zographou and Lavra concerning the ownership of an estate. If Zographou had every right to make his claim, the emperor answered to the claim by insisting on the behavior of the monks of Zographou, who, by claiming their own land, create a scandal in the Holy Mountain. It must be avoided at any cost. This example shows us that scandal can be a driving force to hurry to settle a quarrel as fast as possible, outside any legal framework, by compromise. The use of force, which is definitely a kind of scandal, seems to be used by the monasteries to force the authorities to settle the case by compromise. The compromise allowed the avoidance of any further tensions and violence by giving to the most outrageous litigants a half victory. Here, the respect of justice, equity, and law are not in the equation to solve disputes between monasteries. The louder monks get what he wants by creating scandal. In conclusion, the monasteries of Montatos as legal entities used numerous abusive judicial or extrajudicial tactics in their lawsuits against their monastic neighbors. In court, they presented forged documents, witnesses under their influence. They used dilatory tactics as to refuse to cooperate or be present in court. All these tactics invalidate de jure the claim of the monastery who use it. But some of these procedural offenses are also punished in the Byzantine law from a fine to exile. If indeed the claim of the monasteries who use these tactics are always invalidated, de facto they are never punished. The comparison with some lawsuits of aristocrats in the patriarchal court of Constantinople revealed that the behavior is similar to the aristocratic behavior, and that the Byzantine aristocracy seems not to be punished as well concerning these abusive judicial tactics. The dividing line between aristocrats and monasteries lied in the use of violence before, during, and after a lawsuit. If the aristocrats of Constantinople are always condemned by fines and penances, for the monasteries of Montatos, violence goes with forced compromise. The use of force and tumult in the Holy Mountain create an atmosphere of scandals in the garden of the Theotokos. The Byzantine authorities wanted to avoid any never-ending conflict between monasteries, which are by definition eternal legal entities, and avoid the disturbance against the prior of the monks for the state and the emperor. To avoid tumult, the authorities favor agreements of peace which are not always in accordance with the legal truth. The instatement of a ratio of power by a monastery to obtain the ownership of an estate against one of this neighbor is comparable here to a sort of blackmail. Furthermore, the status of the monastery itself is very protective against any punishment, in fact. Indeed, as legal entities, a monastery cannot be punished as an individual, and it is very hard for the secular authority to remove any monastic property at the condemnation. Finally, the time is an asset for the monasteries of Montetos compared to an individual litigant. If the second one is limited by their life, the monasteries as legal entities seem immutable and their activities preserved all the legal documentation it needs to succeed in court. This special legal status in Byzantium, on which an in-depth study is needed, is probably also the key to understand the longevity of the Holy Mountain until today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, ιδιαίτερα επειδή προσέξατε το χρόνο. Και έχουμε τώρα χρόνο, μας έχει μείνει για συζήτηση. Αν έχουμε ερωτήσεις. Απορίες. Τίποτα. Τότε μπορούμε να κλείσουμε τη συνεδρίαση και να ευχαριστήσουμε ακόμη μια φορά τον ομιλητή μας.
Ευχαριστώ.